G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day. Welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast, the show for families who want more than just financial success. They want to grow their wealth, strengthen relationships, and set both themselves and the next generation up for long-term success in business, in family, and in life. My name's Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Today's guest is someone I've followed and respected for quite a period, Dr. Mark Ferguson from Next Gen Agri. Mark's a rare breed in our industry. He's got a PhD in sheep genetics, but he's not buried in just theory. He's out in the paddock, in the data, and in the trenches, helping producers make smarter, more profitable genetic decisions across Australia and New Zealand. He's also the host of the Head Shepherd podcast, a show many of you will know where he explores cutting-edge ideas in livestock production, business, and leadership. And let me tell you, he doesn't shy away from the big conversations. And this brings us to today's episode, inspired by one of Mark's articles where he asked a simple but powerful question. What's worse, being wrong or being slow to change? You see, in a fast-moving world, especially in ag, clinging to old thinking isn't safe. It's actually risky. So today we're going to delve deep into mindset, why it matters, where it holds us back, and how producers can train themselves to think more clearly, more curiously, and more courageously. Now you might be thinking, I'm not into sheep genetics or livestock breeding. Is this really the podcast episode for me? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Because today's episode isn't about animals or data. It's about how we think, how we make decisions, and how we respond to change. And that applies to every farmer, every business owner, and every family trying to stay ahead in a fast-moving world. So if this conversation sparks something for you, I'd love it if you'd share the episode with someone who needs to hear it, whether it's a family member, a neighbour, or even your advisory team. Good thinking spreads fast when we help it along. Sharing the episode is the best thanks we can get. So without further delay, Mark, it's great to have you on the podcast, mate.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here. Great to be on the show.
Good to have you here, mate. Now, before we dive into some of these bigger themes, and I've bitten off something fairly large to chew here, I think.
It is significant.
Yeah. So from your point of view, mate, just for anyone who doesn't know you, what's your story? What sort of shaped your thinking early on, and how did that sort of get to Next Gen Agri, mate? Can you just run us through that? Yeah,
it's an interesting question, Ben, and I'll take us back early, I guess. I grew up, like many of us, in an ag background, was really, really fortunate to have both sets of grandparents on farms, one on dairy farm, one on the farm where I grew up on, which was sort of sheep and wheat sort of farm. I guess, thinking about often, as I was reflecting on it this morning, I was pretty lucky that our farm wasn't that big, so mum and dad both had off-farm jobs quite often. So a lot of the farming happened sort of between 5:30 p.m. and 8:30 a.m. when dad would be putting the crops in or harvesting or whatever. And so that kind of left us kids to do a fair bit of the farming, which I think, like reflecting back, was actually a really, really good thing. We had a lot of autonomy. We did a lot of things. We farmed on the weekends. We farmed after school, before school. So so very much an ag background, but the joy of watching mum and dad kind of have different careers meant that we never had a fixed thing that we were doing. Like dad changed around a bit. He could turn his hand to anything. Kind of, I guess his work ethic and his sort of ability to have a crack at anything was sort of something that I think has sort of rubbed off on me. And so, beyond that, school, uni, PhD in genetics and kind of just fell in love with breeding stuff when I was 11 or 12 and genetics. And just because mum and dad, again, weren't that controlling and never said no, really. So we actually end up, I think, owning most of the livestock on the farm by the time we were sort of 14 and 15, my brother and I. And so we were, very much given a lot of autonomy, a lot of opportunity, and just have always loved genetics, which is kind of the foundation of Next Gen Agri.
Mm-hmm. And so what does Next Gen Agri actually do, mate, just for everyone out there listening?
Yeah, good question. And that depends on the day a bit, but at our core, we're a genetics consulting company. So we help sheep and beef breeders and goat breeders to, I guess, get the most out of their genetic programs, whether they're breeding stud animals or selling rams or bulls, or whether they're just buying those animals and sort of optimizing that genetic potential on farm. So helping people sort of navigate what can be a fairly complex world of genetics and turn that into genetic gain on their properties, which improves their productivity and profitability. We do a little bit of project management as well on behalf of industry groups. So we you'll see me around giving talks or running projects on behalf of industry. But I guess at our core, we're a genetics consulting company.
So I suppose that then turns us into the reason for the podcast today is obviously you're dealing with people possibly that are a little bit more open-minded, wanting to maximise their genetics than a lot of the old school thinking. And when you and I first sort of got connected, I went back to the website, had a look through the Next Gen Agri website, trying to figure out who this Mark guy was and the way he thought. And there was an article in there that you wrote, I reckon it'd be about 18 months ago or 2 years ago. And you sort of entitled it off, "The Real Risk in Agribusiness is Being Slow, Not Wrong." And it really sort of struck a chord with me. So I think it's really important in agriculture today more than ever. But just to go back to that, what did you actually mean by that? Being slow, not wrong is more risky.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And yeah, we do really enjoy the articles we're sort of putting out, and often it's my opportunity often I'll reflect on something I've heard or something that's fired me up during the fortnight before, and we'll sit down and write an article about it. And that particular one, I guess the point is that I guess in ag we often get stuck in the way that we do things. It's not just in ag, that's humans generally, and often are really slow to adapt to change. And whereas if you compare that with sort of startup culture and go to Silicon Valley, I had the opportunity to do that a few years ago, and you just see fast fail culture and how much faster that makes the boat go by being the ability to actually have a crack at something, fail and admit you're wrong and move on, and do that iteratively or do that quite often and quite fast means that we end up evolving our businesses so much more quickly. And then you see other businesses which will sit there and has to be proved until it's kind of down to the P equals less than 0.00001 before you actually make that change. And everyone in the district's already made that change. You might be the last to no-till or whatever. And by then you're at risk of someone buying your farm because you've been underperforming for a decade while everyone else is grabbing those opportunities that innovations always avail themselves. So I guess the point really was that we have to be continually evolving. The environment's changing, markets are changing, the technology is changing. If you're not evolving, then you are getting left behind, and we see a lot of people sort of sticking to their guns and slowly losing their net worth.
Well, it's really fearful to fail, isn't it? I mean, I know for me, my growth over the last 5 years of starting the podcast, starting the coaching business and all those sorts of things, there's been so many times there where I've tried things and failed. And I'll be blunt, when I first started off, it was really difficult to change my mindset into this whole, because I came from a financial advice background and you could not make mistakes. Like there was no try, fail, that didn't work, who cares? Because you're responsible for managing people's money. Yeah. And I suppose it's the same with the medical industry, rolling it out and failing quickly in a medical field is probably not a good idea. But in my business, and what I got to the point was, if I keep waiting, things just aren't going to happen quickly enough and they're not going to iterate. And I'm guessing within your world, there's a long lead time between doing something and seeing the results. So do you find in agriculture now with the next generation coming through that people are starting to be more open to this failure is a lesson, not actual failure? Or are you still seeing that fixed mindset still really stuck in people? Succession wasn't ideal for you, and deep down you don't want to go through the same thing with your kids. But now you're starting to think about the next stage, and the kids are starting to ask questions, and there's no clear plan. That's where we come in. We help proactive farming families who are 5 to 10 years out from succession get clear on a plan so you all know exactly where you're headed, how to get there, and how to bring the family with you, so you can lead with confidence, avoid the traps, and keep the family strong through the next big chapter. Go to agricoach.com.au/prepare to learn more, because winging it is never a successful strategy. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, I guess we're fortunate to work with people that generally are open-minded, people that pick up the phone and talk to me and want us involved generally are more open-minded. But I think as a rule, there's a lot of, you're in the game of generational change, and there's a lot of pressure comes onto the next generation when they take over the reins of a business, and there's that sort of desire to basically not stuff it up. And sometimes there's generations around that are kind of, it may feel like they're kind of watching and waiting for you to screw up. So there is a bit of that fear factor. But I think we do see some people in their business, the people we get to deal with are open to change. They want to try new things. They're kind of hitting us up for what's the latest, what's the greatest. I was on a call with a couple yesterday, brother and sister, that basically just book an hour to chat with me about what's next, because that's just what they want to do. They want to be looking. And so there's, I guess, as there is in all human populations in farming, there's the whole normal distribution of people. But I think we are seeing the younger generation do what they do best, which is to challenge the norm, which I really enjoy about the young people they're in ag today.
Yeah, me too, mate. And I'm probably blessed as well. The people that approach me, and we have within our High Performing Families Accelerator Mastermind, is they are people that are ahead of the curve. So they're trying to be prepared for what's coming next. And generally, my space, that intergenerational space, is looking at succession, but 5 to 15 years before succession traditionally goes through. So trying to get people to take action early. It's only the people that are early adopters or are willing to fail and try things and want to be ahead of the curve that actually reach out and say, yeah, Ben, this is exactly what we want to do. But the interesting part is I see a massive correlation between success and that mindset, which is really counterintuitive, because they're willing to fail, they're willing to take risks, they're willing to look silly potentially, but then financial success and all the other successes seem to follow them. Do you find the same thing correlates across in your space, mate?
Yeah, 100%. I think, I feel like the first mistake is the hardest, and after that you just get good at losing skin. And I think we definitely see that success is linked to those people that try more new things and are willing for some of those things to go wrong. And I think it's not 100% correlation, but it's well and truly up there. Obviously, you can't be frivolous and ridiculous about it, but by building a hypothesis, this should go right based on this, this, and this, give it a crack. It may not work because it doesn't work in your environment, or you got the wrong year, or just for whatever reason you didn't actually do it as well as you could, but you still learnt something. And I guess that the big formative thing for me was going up to Silicon Valley a couple of times, where just understanding that mindset that is up there. Like, everyone's salary is written on the wall. There's no secrets. It's all very open. It's just a mindset of let's get on and let's make this world different. And I think, you kind of never unlearn going up there, I reckon. And I recommend anyone to, if they can get themselves to Stanford Uni or around Palo Alto at any point, it's well and truly worthwhile to kind of change the way you think about the world.
Well, that's getting off your own dung heap, isn't it? I mean, that's true for anyone. I mean, you and I caught up with each other last weekend down at the World Angus Forum, and the amount of people I saw come along to the event and were mixing with other people that were looking for new innovative ways of doing things. Getting out off farm can be really valuable because it increases the size of the world for you and increases the opportunities out there.
Yeah, I mean, those quotes around you're the function of the people that you surround yourself with, and it's so true. If you're stay at home and sit on the same stool at the same pub every Friday night and get and talk to the same people, there is no opportunity to change your mindset. There's no opportunity just to experience new things.
That's interesting, mate. One of the things that I noticed you wrote in there, and this is something I struggled with coming out of financial advice, was something called a fixed versus curious mindset. And what I've noticed over the years, and it's a bit like stating the obvious, but when my daughter was born and she's now about to turn 9, she's intensely curious about everything. I mean, we sit down at the dinner table at night time and she asks the strangest questions sometimes. I mean, she asked the other day what the law of thermodynamics was. She read it in a book at 8. And
hopefully you could answer that, mate.
Well, my wife's an engineer, so she was able to answer it. I just smiled and nodded. But the thing is we're intensely curious when they're younger. And one of the things we've instigated is with ChatGPT is we'll actually ask some of these questions and say, hey, ChatGPT, what's the law of thermodynamics? And can you explain it to, say, a 10 or a 12-year-old? And, it's amazing what it comes back with. But when we're young, we're really curious. And I also find, on the farm, when we're dealing with the next generation, when they're in their 20s, they're really curious how new ways to do things. But then as we age, we seem to get brittle in our thinking. And I know I'm 48 now, so I find I'm less likely to take on risks. I'm less likely to be open to new ideas. And I work really hard at that. And so what we do is we become really curious. And when we're younger, and then as we get older, we have the potential to be more fixed in our thinking. So how do you see that play out in rural producers? Like, if you see someone come in the doors and they want to have a chat to you, what does a fixed mindset look like versus a curious mindset?
Yeah, it's a massive one. And I think it probably fundamentally underpins some of the challenges that we face in ag is just an overabundance of fixed mindset. It's kind of that belief that when things are bad, they can only get worse. And when things are good, they can only get better. It's that belief that things are outside of your control. We spend a lot of our time, if you're in a fixed mindset, you spend a lot of time worrying about the stuff that you have no control over. You're worried about the government, you're worried about the weather, you're worried about, and some of these things are real, but you have no control over them. But you can't get yourself out into that mindset of like, well, let's find the things that I can control, and let's get really, really curious about how I can control them better. And I think we see when people change that mindset and shift over to that curious mindset, it's phenomenal to see where new businesses will spark out of, or just new ways of doing things and new approaches. So I guess we see it all the time. And again, I guess our clients tend to be those that are kind of curious enough to want to do things differently. But I do lots of talks around the place and have do lots of shearing shed presentations and have a series of people in the back row with their arms crossed. And I love reading people's body language and looking down their nose at you, sort of like, what do you know, boy, kind of stuff. And I'm no longer that young boy anymore. I'm also 48. And I think you can just read those people versus the ones sitting up the front row that are leaning in, taking notes, and you kind of know who's going to be farming in the next 30 years out of those two, just because we just see that success from people just really wanting to know more and not accepting the status quo. And I think I have the pleasure of dealing with a few people I went to uni with and a few people that kind of sort of got into ag late and so aren't afraid to sort of look stupid. And I think that's the massive thing that often as we get older, we kind of think that people expect us to know the answers until we can't ask the question anymore. And we see that a bit in when we have like stock agents and stuff in the room, that they have that position of authority with their clients, and so aren't going to be the ones so they're more happy out the back cooking the barbecue rather than being in the front asking the questions. And we kind of see that as we age, that we're so much more worried about what people think of us than we are actually bettering ourselves, which blows your mind really. And we all make the same mistake of worrying about what someone else thinks. In reality, people are thinking about themselves. They're not worried about what shirt you're wearing or what you look like or what question you ask. They're just not thinking about, they're in their own heads thinking about themselves. And I think we need to really, really challenge ourselves to stay curious, to stay open, to want to know why, or want to know, is that the only way that we can run this place? I often I'd love to run an exercise of like, if the farm had no fences, had no infrastructure, had nothing, what would you do on that farm? Rather than we can only do this because that fence is there, or we're set up to run these type of sheep or these type of cattle because that's what we've always done. But is that what you would do if you landed there today with a blank slate, or would there be a completely different production system? And again, that's that curious mindset of like, righto, let's just throw everything out and say, righto, what would we do? And I think the more we kind of do that hypothetically, obviously not going to bulldoze the fences because no one can afford to do that. But at least if we know what we would do, then we can evolve the business towards what that might look like, rather than kind of just stay doing what we've always done, using the same people that use the same genetics for 40 years, used the same super rate for 40 years, of the same sort of pastures. We see all of that out there, and I love it when I get those phone calls from those sort of people that have the next generation has come through and made and is looking, because you're like, ladies and gentlemen, I've got great news for you. The only way is up. We've got so much potential sitting in your business, and that is great when they make that switch, because often there's some really, really, rather than the 0.1% that we might have to make in kind of our clients, you're making 10% changes because of there's just so much potential sitting on the table.
It's interesting, Ferg. We've got 3 pillars when it comes to intergenerational success. If you want to grow your business and be successful as a family and then go over, and the first one's well-being, the second one's wealth, and the third one is wisdom. And one of the things I quite often talk to the current generation, so that's the mums and dads on the farm that are 45 to 60, is usually say we've got to transfer that wisdom for one generation to another. And so that's passing all that wisdom that you've learnt over the last 30, 40 years that you've been operating, plus the generations that come before you. But we're also going to be curious enough to realise that there's going to be some wisdom transition from the next generation up to you. So looking to your kids, because they go off to uni, they go out in the world, they think differently, they've got fresh ideas, they're not got hang-ups in the past. And trying to explain to them that is so critical in this situation, that you start listening to your children and getting that wisdom to filter back up. That's when you really start to harness the the power of that multi-generational business and what you've actually got. But a lot of time fear and ego kicks in. The fear of, well, we've done it this way for years. That's how it works. I couldn't possibly. But also ego. I don't want to look stupid, like I don't know what I'm doing or make a mistake, because my whole success has been built on being able to do things repetitively over again and get better and better results. It's really, really frustrating to see that kick in, but I think that's human nature.
Yeah. I think the thing that I love the most in my business is when I get a call from a client who's got a different species or a completely different production system than we're currently working, because it allows me to be naive and not have to pretend I'm the expert, or like you can just ask all the dumb questions, and it's so much fun when you're getting to know something new. And I think where we are at in the world, like there is no excuse not to be curious. Like there's so many podcasts, there's so much great information that's just there for free for everybody. Like you compare that to like I used to go to my grandmother's and grandmama and pa's house, and the set of encyclopedias on the bookshelf, and that was your source of knowledge. Between that and the papers that came in the door, that was all we had. And obviously like that was minuscule compared to what we're at today, where you can be listening to you and I chat any time of any day of the week, and there's a million other podcasts you can listen to. So there is just zero excuse not to be curious today, because there's so much free and really good information around.
Yeah, and being able to just feel like the beginner all the time and ask the silly questions, there's a big correlation between the people that I work with and get to know over time, is they eventually get to this point where they're willing to look like absolute beginners, and they can say, look, I'm an expert in my field over here, but all this other stuff, I'm really just a beginner. Help me understand. And that makes the transition and the exponential gain so much easier when someone comes in with that curiosity mindset and willing to take those risks. Now, obviously, you don't want to bet the sheep station, pardon the pun, but you got to take these risks appropriately. But it just makes the transition so much easier when you do have that curiosity about how can I do this better. The old quote I usually like to say when I go do a talk out in public is I'll say, sometimes you can learn more from watching an idiot than listening to a genius, and I'll get you can choose which one you're looking at today. But sometimes, I've learned a lot from watching the people I don't want to be, the things that I don't want to do, and I still learn things from there. I think that's a superpower.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Now, mate, one of the things you put a quote in there, which again resonated with me. It was a quote, I think, from Jeff Bezos, who's the founder of Amazon, one of the world's biggest companies, and you put in there that his statement was, strong opinions loosely held. Now, you said that was a real important philosophy for you. Why is that, mate? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a good one, and people that know me well, particularly my wife, know that I'm very rapid to change my mind, but
frustratingly, hey?
But equally can be quite stuck on an opinion as well. So yeah, I'm sure I'm a frustrating person to be around, but I do like the sort of concept of discussing things through properly, and I feel like if you have a strong opinion, then someone will be willing to go against you. If you just sort of sit on the fence, then no one will tell you what they really think. And so I think there's real value in sort of taking a perspective on an issue and arguing that perspective. But there's no point going to your grave fighting the wrong argument, where we see that happen a lot, where you're wrong, but you've got your ego in the way or whatever, and you won't actually change your mind. So I think both of those things are important I think strong opinions are good to bring out everyone's side of the argument properly. And I think if you don't have an opinion, you won't find your crowd, you won't find those people that align with you, and people sort of, I guess, are looking often in ag are looking for leadership, or in the human population generally are looking for leadership. And if you've got no opinion, you're sitting on the fence, then they don't really know what you're about. And so I think it's important to know, for people to know what you're about, but also to be ready to be challenged and change. I was on a call the other day with Graham Gardner, who reminds me of you, Ben. He's one of my PhD supervisors, a great guy. And we were talking about some sort of, I guess, some material that was a bit maybe less scientifically proven around some meat science, and with a client. Guesstimations and beautifully put, just, you show me the peer-reviewed scientific article that proves that, and I'm all in. And until you do that, this is what I know. And I think that's really true. And I guess my whole background's been science, which I probably didn't actually point out, but I've been in research for most of my career until we started Next Gen Agri. And so it's always been about form a hypothesis, put all the good information together and make sure that that's a sensible hypothesis, but then do your darndest to break it and see if you can do the work to see if it actually will hold up and you can acid test it. Because I think even in my younger days, and I think this is one thing I've changed over time, is in my younger days, I reckon I had strong opinions tightly held. I reckon I'd formed a view and I was just looking for information that supported that view and wasn't sort of open to change. And I think I don't know whether I've mellowed or whether I've just educated myself and challenged myself enough to know that that's a really bad way to roll through life. Like you need to be, I guess it's that curiosity thing again, but I think it's a good way to go about it. It's a good way to approach conversations, is to have that opinion, but also be willing to be challenged and change your mind on it. And there's a guy that has just finished working for me, Henry Hickson, and we've had so many arguments, but none of them have ever been real. Mostly it's just because we both have love having strong opinions loosely held.
But that's pretty good. I mean, if you're going to succeed in life, you've got to have some strong opinions about where you're going and have real conviction. And I think that's rooted in character. People with really strong character, ethics and things like that, they'll have very strong opinions on the way the world should be. But if you can balance that out with curiosity, do we go, well, look, these are my character traits. I believe this is where I'm going. I've got a solid vision, because there's going to be a lot of noise out there on the path to success. Like I look at my business, when I first came up with the concept, when I left financial advice and talked to people about it, everyone pretty much said, you're a nutbag. Like, why the hell would you go and do this? Nobody else has done it. And the common comment from people is, well, look around the world and find someone else who's doing what's doing and then model them. And I did, and I couldn't find anywhere in the world. And so everyone told me that, well, this was a stupid idea, because if it wasn't a stupid idea, someone else would have done it. And so for me, I had a very strong opinion that no, this is what needed to happen in the ag space. We need to prepare families for this intergenerational change and driving them forward. But it's my opinions have evolved. So I probably haven't dropped my opinions. They've just evolved over time as to what worked, what hasn't worked. And so I've tweaked my direction rather than wholesalely had an opinion, dropped it, taken up a new one. Because I actually think that can also be a little bit dangerous with people who have opinions one day and then are completely different the next. And they're not anchored anywhere in some sort of direction. And that's why quite often with people sit down and say, one of the most powerful things we do is we write down your plan. What's your 10-year vision? What's your 10-year goals? And they go, I don't know what I'm doing in 10 years. And I'm like, well, write it down. Well, what if it doesn't happen, Ben? What if something changes? What if we don't get the weather that we expected? What if beef prices changes? Well, who cares? You evolve. But if you at least write it down, you've got that strong opinion, and then you're open to navigating through the process. And I think having that strong, anchored opinion and character is a real strong trait in successful people.
Yeah. And I do love the concept of the lone nut. And I don't know if you've seen the clip where there's a guy stands up and dancing, and eventually the whole crowd are dancing, but you need that person out there on the fringes doing something new. Like, we can't always find examples of things that will work, and you have to be willing to get out there. And the joy of doing that, I mean, I love to be the one out running in the rain when no one else is out there. That's just one of the crazy kind of things, the kind of crazy person I am. And I think it's fun to be out on the edge doing stuff, because I'm a big fan of the saying, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Yeah. And look, and the people that we admire in life, Ferg, like the people I look at that I admire are all the ones that are taking risks, and they're usually driven and on a path. Like they're very driven and focused on what they want to achieve, but they're also trying new things. They're failing, as you mentioned, quickly. They're curious. They're open-minded. All the traits that naturally make us fearful of, which is the fear of change. Will I look stupid? What if this doesn't work? The path less trodden is the harder path. All those things that make us fearful are actually the things that will actually make us successful if we embrace them, which is a complete opposite of what we're naturally hardwired to do. We're naturally hardwired to go back into the flock or into the herd and not stand out, because I don't know if about in New Zealand, but here in Australia, the tall poppy syndrome is well and truly prolific.
Mate, it was invented here. Yeah.
Well, it was perfected over here then, mate. But I mean, you go to America and you look at America and they celebrate people taking risks. I mean, like you said in Silicon Valley, if you take a risk and you get it wrong and it doesn't quite work and you fail, so to speak, and learn the lessons and go again, people celebrate that. They're like, wow, that's
promoted.
Great. Here in Australia, we're what we call in our office the crabs in the bucket mentality. Like, people will want to pull you down. So sometimes you got to take those risks emotionally and personally to be able to get ahead and succeed in life. And the families quite often that I see, and many of them are part of the group, is is they're willing to just quietly chip away at their version of what they're trying to achieve, and those compounding results just come over time.
Yeah.
Because have you heard of that? Have you heard of the crab in the bucket mentality?
Yeah.
So just for everyone listening, I only came across this a little while ago, but do you want to explain it, mate? You're the scientist. You'll probably do a better job than me.
Well, I think it's, basically that you got crabs in the bucket, and if one tries to climb out, the other ones will grab it and drag it down. And I think we see that, what I often talk about is in our game, like people love to kick you if you stuff up, and they love to drag you down if you do well. So they kind of just, everyone wants to be average. Like we're all destined to be average if we're not. You might be able to tell the crab in the bucket story better than me, mate.
Well, it's a little bit worse than that. Like when the first one climbs out, it'll try and climb out you. And if you get two in a bucket, I think it was, they'll actually try and pull that one back in, and they'll also smash its claws and try and chop its claws off so it can't climb out, which is bizarre. And then the other thing is that if you get more than sort of, I think it was a dozen. I'm gonna get this wrong, but I'm forgive me everyone, but there's something along the lines of once you get a certain amount in the bucket, then none of them try and climb out. And I see that all the time, and it's a real problem for people because it does invoke fear when you are that crab trying to climb out of the bucket.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, the other thing, mate, is you mentioned in there was confirmation bias. Now, I used to write about confirmation bias when I was a financial advisor, and so we sort of talked about this just a little bit before if we circle back, and it's about, or do you want to talk about confirmation bias? Because in financial advice, we used to see it all the time, but in ag, and especially in the genetic space, can you explain what it is and how you see it show up in your space?
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the biggest issues for facing sort of ability to change is confirmation bias. So essentially, confirmation bias is basically when you're scanning the environment for information that supports you've already formed a view, and you're just looking for information that supports that view. You're completely screening out other opinions, other views, other facts, all trying to support the kind of the view you've already formed. And I think it's a massive thing in agriculture. I mean, if we sort of make an example, it's kind of, some people like horn merinos versus pole merinos, and they'll find all the facts that why a horn merino is better than a pole merino, and they'll completely miss all the opposite facts that don't support their view. And I think it's a combination of both what you think and all the people around you think. It means that you just filter your worldview all for the facts that support where you want to go, or what you think is the norm, and that basically lands you in that same sort of spiral we've been talking about, where you're kind of not going anywhere because you're only seeing facts that support what you already think, and you're only talking to people that support what you already think, and when you multiply that by social media, your feed then gets filled with things that support your view, and so you end up in this kind of mindset where you know how the world works and you're right because everyone else that around you is telling you the same thing. So you must be right, and there must be only one way that it works. And I think probably in the last, 20 years since social media has been at play, this has become a massive problem because you can literally live in your bubble and have no idea that there's a whole heap of other opinions out there or counterfactual evidence that you're actually wrong. And so, yeah, I think we have to be really always questioning ourselves, like, am I thinking that because I want to think that, or is that actually the truth? And I think I've certainly been guilty of this in the past. And I think I sort of referred to a bit of a change in my mindset earlier, but I think you can read a scientific paper and just take out the three facts that support your hypothesis or your view, and kind of blur over the ones that don't quite support that. And you can see it all the time. And I guess I was going to go on before. It's a biologically sensible thing for the brain to do. The brain is obviously, its job is to filter out lots of information. If it processed it, and if it processed every bit of information that it received, even just right now, it would go into overdrive and melt. But so to protect itself, it's always minimizing how much information it needs to process. And so it's quickly just going, well, yep, I know that to be true. I'll move on and process the next bit of information. And so we can kind of see biologically how it's evolved, but it's a big trap for people, particularly if you're in an environment where you're not hearing from different people, you're not being forced to get off your dunghill and go and talk to somebody else. You would be massive risk of confirmation bias.
A couple of other examples, mate, is I used to see in financial advice with shares. So farmers would come in and you'd say, if you're off-farm investments, you could have property, you can have a residential property, land, commercial sheds, you could have shares. And they go, shares, and then they'll go, 20 years ago I bought a couple of shares and they were dodgy and they didn't work out, so shares are bad. And then they go, okay, so that was one experience for you. Tell me about any other you've seen. I said, oh, well, Joe down the road, he invested in shares and it was the worst thing he ever did. And my brother did that and he had a terrible time. So they're always looking for that confirmation so they don't have to go back. Another one is around conflict. And this is probably a really important one for us here today, is conflict is bad. Conflict always leads to a reduction in the quality of family relationships if you have conflict or critical conversations or difficult, hard conversations. What I can tell you, though, is, and then people look for that confirmation. They say, oh, so-and-so has a family, talked about, the next generation coming in, talking about splitting up partnerships, talked about succession, and it all went to shit. And they'll tell you 50 stories about who, as soon as you have start having those tough conversations, all goes to shit. What I can tell you is, in my world, that can be true, absolutely. But also on the other side, difficult conversations, critical conversations, tough conversations can actually strengthen relationships. And I've seen plenty of families where they've had some real tough, difficult choices to make. And then all of a sudden, their relationships are strengthened and the business has gone forward and they've done better than they ever could have done. So the confirmation bias is strong in all of us, not just in one area. It can be right across the board, everywhere we go.
Yeah, massively. I guess we don't want to get into politics, but we are seeing the most divisive area, of all time, and it's being fueled by confirmation bias.
Yeah. So you obviously get to start dealing with people that are starting to be curious. How do you help them, I suppose, in your business? How do you help people become more curious about the 1%ers, shall I say, or the new cutting edge stuff? What are you actually, how are you helping people do that, mate, in your business?
I mean, we can only do this once you've got people's trust, and we know that. So you're obviously early on you're just building trust, but essentially you've got to get to a position where I'm willing to challenge what they tell you as their truths, and be kind of helps them. I'm 6'2" and over 100 kilos, so you're not going to get flattened, well, you might, but you kind of got to be the person that's willing to ask the tough questions, I suppose, and have no emotion attached to the answers or and just be willing to. And then sort of it's the kind of the 3 whys or whatever. Like they'll tell you an answer and then you kind of drill. Don't let them get away with the first answer. You got to ask them why that might be, and sort of, I guess try and help them understand that there's different ways that truth can play out, and that it might be time to kind of challenge some of those things. So I guess it's asking the tough questions is the key thing that I need to do to help people, and I think it's really important that. Often we've got a good friend, Julia Jones, who keeps it real and always tells me that a consultant isn't a paid friend. You actually need to be the person asking the tough questions. You can't be just there sort of rubbing on the back and telling them they're doing a great job and sending them an invoice. You have to be actually adding value, which is often, being the one that asks the tougher questions and asks the questions that other people wouldn't be willing to.
You've got to build a fair bit of trust, don't you? As you mentioned already, there's got to be a fair bit of trust there to be able to do it. And trust is obviously built through various mechanisms, but one's being an expert and being competent, one's being reliable, and then one's being sincere, the old trust model. And if people, what I've found over the years is you can challenge people, and that's part of my job, is to challenge them, not make them comfortable. And if it's coming from the right, sincere place, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, mate, I'm conscious of time today, mate. You've got your daughter's cross country to shoot off to very shortly. So 2 last quick questions. The first one is you specialise in genetic gain and helping people get those 1%ers to compound over time. If you were just talking to the general farming community out there, not just necessarily people in genetics, what's a piece of advice you'd probably give them if you could give them one piece?
That's a good question. I think the one thing I would do for every farming business is just run a progeny test. If you're a livestock business, if you've never run different genetics on your environment, you've never used 2 bulls in next to each other side by side or 2 rams side by side, get a progeny test on your farm. You'll be blown away by the impact that genetics can have on your business. And I don't think you'll ever believe it until you see it with your own eyes. And I've seen people change their minds massively by getting those genetics in their environment and actually going, wow, I thought I was actually a crap feeder, but turns out I just had crap genetics. Like I'm feeding pretty well. Like people cannot ever see they can never differentiate between what is genetics and what is their environment and the way they farm. And until you actually put two different genotypes together, which is best done with a progeny test because you've got enough in common, then you'll really truly believe or see the power of genetics. And I think once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and you'll be as addicted as I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's a technology thing, isn't it? Like the new technology is coming out, embrace it and do this. It's funny, I talked to someone recently that put farm bots in, so remote watering systems, drones, etc., and they worked out it's saving them about $250,000 a year in costs just having that remote monitoring. So I think if you can embrace technology, as much as it's a little bit scary for some people and a little bit difficult to deal with, and in genetics, people like yourself that live and breathe and know it, if it's in other technology, finding the people in that space and surround yourself with the right people will make a huge difference.
Yeah, I love the quote, which is actually Jane Rive's quote, but it's, if you measure it, it moves. And I think it's so true. Once you put where we're at in today's agriculture, you've got opportunities to measure lots of the components of our production systems, and your brain cannot help itself than to want to improve it once you give it a number to improve. But if you give it they look good, or they're good, or whatever.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. Once you put a number on it, you're like, oh crap, they're not as good as I think, or that. Yeah. So put a number on it, work out, and as you said before, have a plan, put numbers around it, work towards it. You'll be amazed at what your brain can do in its spare time. I love the concept of the subconscious mind, that it's always just finding solutions when we're just doing our other thing, because we've told it what the problem is. If you don't tell it what the problem is, you don't have a plan. It's just going to be working on who's the best footy tips to put in next weekend or whatever, if you haven't actually put some information in there for it to churn around on.
Yeah, there's a bit of a woohoo one, mate, that someone suggested to me a couple of years ago, and they said when you want to remember some really quality information, like if you go to a workshop where, say, someone like yourself is talking about genetic gain, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, and what I'll do is if I hear a good podcast, I'll actually say out loud in the car usually, because you look like a weirdo when you're riding your bike down the street or in town, but essentially I'll say, subconscious, I need you to remember that, and then give me that information back when I need it. And so especially if I'm coming up to a presentation, like the other weekend when I was doing the prezzo down at the World Angus Forum, is I actually went through that and I said, subconscious, you got to remember this. And at the right time when I'm doing this prezzo, you need to remind me. And the amount of times when I was in the middle of that presentation, things just kept popping up that have been processing. And I think I agree with you, substantially underestimate the power of what we feed this computer that's in our head. And if you're just thinking you've got people telling you all these negative stories about the weather, about interest rates, about whatever it might be, plus we fill it with social media and the news, I mean, it's no wonder it comes out with negativity and complaints and depression and anxiety, isn't it? Mm. Awesome. Right, mate. One question I love to ask everyone is, if I waved my magic wand and gave you a time machine and you headed back in time, 10 to 15 years ago, so let's say early 30s, what's the one piece of advice you'd give a young Mark if you could give it to him? Yeah,
it's a good question, Ben. And I think what I would say is that back yourself. I think I started a business 7 or 8 years ago, but I should have started it a few years before that. And it's the hardest thing ever, as you know. Like you throw away a salary. You got kids at school. You got a young family. You got all the things that make you want to just stay in the status quo. And so I'll probably took a bit longer to make that jump than I should have. So I think I'd say back yourself and I guess make that transition to that curious mindset a bit quicker as well. I think I was probably hell-bent on fighting the world and proving that I was right rather than sort of really investigating the world properly and trying to work out. So I think what I would say to young people always is, if you've got an idea and you want to go for it, just hook in and have a crack. What's the worst that could go wrong? Like there's really, you can just start again if it all turns to crap. There's always options.
Yeah, well, mate, what's worse, being wrong or being slow?
Exactly.
Mate, that's my biggest advice to my younger self is back yourself. There's so many times early in my life that I should have had a crack, but I was too fearful of making mistakes and it not working out. And I can tell you, I started up my own financial advice practice myself. It was a startup. This business is a startup, and it gets harder as you get older. So start when you're young, start when you're driven. It's never going to get any easier than today. That's the reality. So anyone listening out there, start your off-farm business, get home, start your succession planning, get your off-farm consultants to come in and start tearing your business apart. Like really kick it off today because there's never going to be a better time than today.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Right, Mark, loved having you on, mate. Great insights there. Love the article. Love what you do. Yeah, mate, look forward to the next one.
No, great chat. Thanks, mate. Really enjoyed that. And it made me think harder than I usually have to on a Tuesday. But yeah, no, really loved that. Thanks, mate.
Well, that's a wrap on today's episode with Dr. Mark Ferguson. Before you go, just a couple of takeaways I want to leave you with. Now, the first one is to be truly successful in business and in life, you've got to be really crystal clear on what you want, and you must have a strong opinion around where you want to go, but hold them loosely. The people that thrive are the ones that are always open to new ideas, willing to adapt, and courageous enough to change. The second point I want to leave you with is just the advice Mark would give to his younger self. I would estimate around 50% of the people I interview, their number one piece of advice to their younger self is to back themselves. And I think it's just as relevant for whether you're, 20 now, just starting your career, or you're 50 and you're going into a new phase of life. Figure out what you want and then absolutely back yourself. Because I want you to remember, being wrong is worse than being slow to change, and that it's all stages of your life. I want to really hammer that point home. So if this sparks something for you, I want you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that'd be fantastic if you could do that for me. We've got more conversations coming to help you grow your business, align your family, and stay ahead of the curve. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next episode.